I wanted to ask you if you might talk a little bit about why the mayor's group came together, what the group is trying to achieve, what do they hope to achieve in the future, and what was involved in bringing the mayors together.
Certainly. The genesis of this group goes back about 6 months. In fact, you could probably argue it's gone back years before that. We live right here on the shores of Georgian Bay, and it's not uncommon for the mayors to get together and just talk about what's happening again around the bay, and in particular with water levels. So over the past couple of years, water levels have been a subject of a lot of conversation. As we keep telling people, just walk out on your dock, what do you see? And we see the fact that there's not a lot of water in some instances, and in fact there's been some disturbing photos sent around, and they're captured in some of the work that we did later on as the mayor's group, showing that the water was no longer there. So you look then, of course, to the senior levels of government and ask the question, well, what's going on with this? And what we found out from senior levels of government, there's a lot of talk, there was a lot of good research going on, but there was absolutely no action, especially in the short term. So this led to further conversations as to what is the role for the mayors. And initially this was a difficult question because many mayors said, well, it's not our responsibility, we'll let the province, we'll let the federal government look after this. But as we talked more and more to the business people, to the residents, they said, we're being impacted this year. And frankly, if some of our businesses don't get some assistance this year, we'll be out of business next year when these grand plans start to roll out, if they ever do roll out.
Yep.
So the mayors said, gee, we should do something about this, and it started out with a very small group, including myself, and said, let's send a note out to all of the mayors. So the first question is, well, how many mayors are there? And it turned out that around Georgian Bay, there's 44 municipalities that touch the bay, which is a much larger number than I expected. In addition to the municipalities, we also have quite a number of First Nations communities who also depend upon the water. So we sent out a very preliminary letter just asking for levels of interest regarding the water levels. That was sent out in November, late November last year. And we heard back virtually from every mayor, all indicating that they were being affected. So the question is, okay, well, if we got this kind of response, now what do you do with it? So we very quickly pulled together a steering committee of all the mayors, and there was 7 of us on the steering committee, and said, first of all, how do we demonstrate to, especially the senior levels of government, that we do have a problem, because we don't get many of them to come up and visit our communities.
Okay.
And how do we go about forming a request? Because it's one thing to just say, I've got a problem, it's something else to say, and this is what I want to do about it.
Right.
So we came upon 2, strategies for that. The first was called the casebook. And the casebook was nothing more than a simple statement of, this is what I saw in my community. Mm-hmm. So we didn't ask people to do statistical studies or hire consultants and do reviews. Just saying, I talked to the business, and this marina won't be able to put half of its slips in this year. I talked to that restaurant that depends upon water access, and they're going to have to close this year. I talked to this resident who said, I've got to extend my dock by another 100 feet this year. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of stories that started flooding back in. And we created a casebook that's now up to 50 pages long. It includes 28 of the communities around the bay who have chosen and taken the time to actually identify what the problems are. And this is what we've developed over the last 6 months and brought to a good compendium of the harms that we're seeing this year around Georgian Bay. So with that, with the casebook in hand, we went to talk to both the provincial level of government as well as the federal level of government, mm-hmm. and said we would like, first of all, financial assistance, because the individuals identified in the casebook are facing a financial harm here. It's a slow-moving emergency kind of basis, so there must be some federal or provincial programs to help out with that. Specifically, we approached Minister John Baird, and he has expressed interest in helping us. We've not seen anything as of today's date, and this is towards the end of May. We've also approached the Premier Wynn's office and made the same request, and again, we've had some encouraging words, but as of this date, we have not received anything of a hard nature with that. We are hopeful that we're going to see something over the next month or so in response to this, but again, to this point, we have not seen much there. So at this time, the mayors have backed off. We have done the study. We presented our case to the province. We've communicated this to the public quite widely. And we're just about to close up this particular phase because it is, as I said, at 2013 what is happening this year.
Okay.
Just in summary, what we did find is that in order for our businesses and our municipalities to maintain their business services this year, we're looking at about a $20 million support that's required, and that's the request that was made of the province and the federal government. We're also seeing there's many other forms of potential harm, and this is everything as the water recedes. You may appreciate that all of a sudden you've got a lot more land in front of your lakefront property. In fact, it may no longer be a lakefront property.
Right.
So what happened to the property value? And as the property value declines, we mayors worry about, well, what about the tax impact? Because if the property is not assessed at certain value, then the taxes will also go down on that.
Right.
We've also seen instances where as lines converge because the water shore is no longer there, you get into legal disputes.
Yes.
What are the costs of those? How are those going to be resolved?
Right.
So there's many knock-on longer-term effects that have yet to be resolved, and we'll leave that for the next group of mayors.
Good. How do the mayors around Georgian Bay view their relationship or their connection to mayors around the larger body of the lakes? Was there any communication or any thought of communicating beyond Georgian Bay, or was that the community that made sense to you?
Now, we very early on said we're going to focus on Georgian Bay, and we did that very deliberately. First of all, as soon as you open up to the entire Great Lakes Basin, you're involved in an international discussion. So we've got to deal with the states and we've got to deal with the federal governments because the IJC, the International Joint Commission, has got jurisdiction. So as soon as you put your hand up as a small body of mayors in this great big larger pool, just to use the analogy here, you suddenly become a very small voice. And as I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of good study that's been done. It's interesting, if you go and Google low waters and the Great Lakes, you'll see the studies go back 20 years.
Right.
So very good studies, lots of comprehensive data out there. I read as much of it as I can. But then you come back to say, we want to do something. I'm talking 2013, and the cold reality is that if you want to talk to the broader aspects as to how I bring the water back, you're never going to fix it in 2013. So you immediately take that part of it off the table. So I said to have any hope of a resolution for 2013, and to also frame the question so that it became a Canadian question and an Ontario question, where we had some hope of resolution, then we had to just focus on Georgian Bay.
Makes sense.
And it was done very deliberately.
Makes sense. Good. Okay. Could you be a little bit more specific on how you thought about the categories of economic impact? So, what sort of framework did you use for thinking about economic impact? Did you have any discussions or disagreements over what should be an economic impact or not, or was it sort of just throw everything into the basket?
It was quite an organic process, and again, it comes back to how mayors relate to their community, that we didn't look at our community through a consultant's eyes, if I can phrase it like that.
Right.
You go down to the coffee shop and you talk to the guy who owns the marina, or you talk to the guy who owns the restaurant, and he's not going to categorize it by saying, well, this is my human resources impact and this is my capital goods impact. He said, this is what's happening to my business.
Right.
So those were the natural lines for us to categorize this.
Okay.
So as we put it into the casebook, we said, what is the harm to business?
Yep.
We recognized marinas as a very special form of business, so they were also pulled out as what's happening with our marinas. And the stories with marinas, there's fairly consistent stories. The number of slips, the amount of dredging, so those numbers quickly came through that one. The third major category was municipalities. And there's many municipalities who have quite a large asset base, whether it's docks, whether it's transportation facilities, right by the water. And as I said, they're looking at some fairly significant projects in order to redress this. So those things all came together and just seemed to make so much sense. And the good story about that is that they convey well to other audiences.
Right.
Virtually everybody, I don't care what level of government or what discipline, if the guy who owns the marina sits down and says, this is what's happening to my business, you can understand it. You don't have to refer to your consultants. You can say, I understand this. I got it.
Makes sense. One of the areas that we've been interested in but have had trouble finding good structured thinking on is tourism, the effect on tourism and how you reflect that. How did you think about that? Or have you found any good sources for that or other sources for that kind of thinking?
Now, we found some okay sources, if I can phrase it like that, and I'd like to say we had an economist look at this and do up our major work, but that's not the case at all. We actually went to the ministry and asked the question, could you talk to us about the economy around Georgian Bay? And the unfortunate part is that they can slice and dice it by geographic area, they can do it by county, they can do it by territory, but nobody has ever put Georgian Bay together. So if you try to say, bring up the watershed around Georgian Bay and talk to me about the economy in that area, there's nothing to be had. So what we did is we sort of back-ended it. We talked to representative samples around the bay and their specific economies. We characterize that in terms of the known number of marinas and some idea of the economies, and we come up with the estimate. And our estimate is we feel the economic impact is in the order of $50 to $100 million annually.
On tourism.
Tourism is a component of the economy.
That's impressive.
So,
Okay.
So this is as close as we can come.
Good.
And this is where you have to realize that, you know, tourism, as the water goes, it affects other businesses. It affects
Right.
a lot of the residents. And a lot
Right.
of people don't realize there's a lot of people that live here full time.
Right.
So it's hard to say, well, I'm up for 4 months, am I a tourist? Or I'm up for 6 months, am I a
Right.
tourist?
Right.
And so you get into this kind of things that economists love debating.
Yes.
But as I said, we come back to the basic honesty. What is the impact upon the people that live here and enjoy Georgian Bay?
Good. That's great. Okay. Let me hear. What impacts hit the town of Midland hardest, both as a corporation or as an entity and as a community? Which were the ones that really made a difference in what you saw here?
Well, I guess, first of all, most directly, is that the town has assets. We have a town dock, a town marina. So luckily that we're on a very deep portion of the lake. So we can, not to suggest we want to, but we can lose a lot of water, and you'd see it drop 6 inches or 8 inches, but we've got a lot of depth beneath that. That being said, though, we still have to go and do some work in our docks because all of a sudden you can't get up to the dock level anymore.
Right.
So we've got to readjust all of the ramps and all of the stairways in there. So it's a minor cost. I'm not say this is a major cost for us
Yep.
at all.
Okay.
More concerning, though, are the indirect costs that we depend upon the taxes of the businesses and the
Right.
people in our town. We've got, for example, a major mill that's just down on our waterfront, and
Right.
they bring in grain by ship. They have had to half load this for many years. Just this past fall, they had to stand off out in the harbor because there was insufficient water for them to bring the boat into dock. And they had to wait an extra day for the wind to change just to move the water back in. So as you can see, as businesses struggle more, they're less profitable. You have the issues of tax base
Sure.
and all of these sorts of knock-on problems.
Okay.
And if you go very directly to the tourism aspects of it, this is people wanting to recreate, bringing their boats in here, that if they have a concern that the water is not there, obviously they've got choices in a boat. You can go
Right.
here and go there, so
Right.
they'll have other choices even outside of Canada, if I can
Right.
say that. And as they stop participating in your economy, then all of my stores along the main street are affected, and
Right.
with that, the whole economy of the community.
Okay.
So there's both direct and indirect. Midland, as I said, is very fortunate. We've got a very deep body
Right.
of water in front of us, so we're probably less impacted. But if you go to some of the others, and I'm sure you probably saw the press release on the Chichiman, which is the major transportation link between Manitoulin Island and the Moose Peninsula.
Yep.
And they've had to do some very significant work just to make sure that that can still operate. And the last I heard is the South Baymouth, which is their Manitoulin Island port. They weren't sure whether they could actually land the boat properly.
Right. Yeah,
So-
I heard that's true. And so not really big issues on the municipal infrastructure, water intake, water processing, and that's not too big deal?
For Midland, but if I go to my very immediate neighbors here, this is the township of Tay.
Yep.
They draw water from the bay. We don't draw water from the bay here in Midland.
see.
We've got underground
Gotcha.
aquifers, but they draw water from the bay. And they are looking very seriously at a $10 million project to extend their water intake.
Gotcha.
So I don't have to go that far
Good,
to see
okay.
some very significant impacts.
Good. I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, I understand. I think that helps us understand what the economic picture is here. In the longer term, how do you see the municipal level of government playing a role in helping in the water portfolio over the years beyond the short term?
Well, I'd like to give my senior levels of government there too, that quite clearly this mandate is in their camp.
Right.
They should be very concerned about the water levels in their bodies of water, and these are major Ontario-based and Canadian-based bodies of water. So really, in a technical sense, municipalities have very little direct responsibility. But as you can see in this case, we've become a little bit of an action group that says we missed this whole short-term look at what the issues are. It's fine to talk about a 5 or 10 year, 20-year strategy, but I live in the present.
Yes.
And unless I can survive in the present, I really have very little interest about the future. And I know
Yep.
it probably sounds very self-serving,
No.
but a lot of people are like that. So
Right.
we as mayors have brought the current issues and the impacts to a level of understanding that I've not seen before.
Mhm.
So I am very pleased with the impact that we've had, and I suspect that we'll continue this. It's not going to be a 2013 and that's the end of it. We're going to, I'm sure, have this discussion again in 2014.
Mhm.
And it's my hope that as the provincial and federal government understands that there's both short-term and long-term aspects to this issue, that we can play a more coordinating role as opposed to a role of reminding them that there is something that needs to be done.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very, very much.